Go, Richard. Okay, so my name is Richard Matson, and I am a partner in a company called Gathr Films. Gathr is a distributor that has pioneered a platform called Theatrical on Demand. Theatrical on Demand is basically like Kickstarter for movie screenings. So we have a library of films from filmmakers and from distributors, and people can, across the country, can request a screening of these films, request a screening in their town. They get in touch with us, put a request in, we negotiate with the theaters, and we establish a threshold, which is a minimum number of tickets that have to be sold, pre-sold, for the screening to happen. That person that requested it then tells their friends and family and their community that here's this opportunity to bring this movie to our town, and if enough people pre-reserve a ticket, the screening happens. If not, it goes away. We established the company to solve a few problems in movie distribution that we had seen. I mean, one, for the audience, we wanted to give them an active voice in programming what comes to their community and what movies they get to see. For distributors and for filmmakers, we're trying to eliminate some of the risk in marketing the movie, the financial risk. If you book your movie into Oklahoma City and you spend $5,000, $10,000 marketing it and nobody shows up, then that's no fun as a distributor. And then for movie theaters themselves, there's this stat that Gathr is really founded on. Over the course of a year, 85% of movie tickets will go unsold. And if you limit that to Monday through Thursday, that number jumps to 93%. And so for theaters, we're giving them a no-risk way to diversify their programming and also put butts in seats in midweek. So that's what we're doing. We've been around for about 3 years. We had our first really big successes over the past year and a half. Last year, we had a film called Girl Rising, which is a documentary about empowering girls around the world through education. That movie is currently grossed about $1.8 million through Theatrical on Demand. It was, I think, the 4th highest grossing documentary of last year. And we followed that up with a few other successes. So it's this idea of audience-driven movie screenings that's starting to kind of be a part of the distribution world. We're working with lots of distributors. IFC we've worked with in the past. And we're, in those cases, if they've said, okay, we're gonna pick up this movie and put it in 10 or 15 markets, then Gathr will come along and say, okay, well, we'll take the rest of the country. And if there's demand for the movie, we can satisfy that demand and create theatrical exposure.
Hi, I'm Jim Browne. I'm from Argot Pictures, and we're based in New York. We are a distributor primarily of documentary films. We're what's known as a service deal distributor, in that we don't take rights for the films. We don't own the license of your films. We work in partnership with filmmakers to do small-scale theatrical releases, anywhere as small as 6 cities, and we've done probably up to about 80 cities in terms of the size of the releases that we've done. I'm also a festival programmer. I'm a programmer for a festival called the Abu Dhabi Film Festival, and I look for films from North America to play in Abu Dhabi, and that festival takes place in late October. So when we started off, we've been in business for about 8 years, and we started off dealing more with narrative films, and now we've sort of shifted our focus primarily to documentary, because we're basically working with a lot of smaller films that we're trying to elevate the profile of them and, you know, get them theatrical life, get them as much publicity, and we've found with, you know, the films that we've been working with, we were having an easier time getting documentaries into theaters, because, you know, we do a lot of outreach and partnering with organizations. I was saying to some filmmakers earlier that, you know, we're essentially, you know, working with filmmakers to kind of create a political party around the film and sort of identify, locate, and reach out to organizations, NGOs, nonprofits that, the mission of their organization might be closely aligned with some of the themes or issues that are raised in the film. And we work with them to help to get out the word and, do ticket buys and, special event screenings. Another thing that we've definitely done a lot of, we do a lot of music-related films, and we try and create special events around screenings, live performances by musicians following up screenings of the film. A film that we had sort of our biggest success with a number of years ago was a film called Note by Note, which is about the making of a Steinway piano, and it followed the making of one piano over the course of the year. So we put the actual piano, the star of the movie, on tour, and the piano went around to many cities around the country, and then we'd get local area Steinway artists that would play like a George Gershwin set after following the film, and that was a very successful run that really helped to elevate the profile of that film. Went on to do very well digitally. We also work to make deals for VOD and digital and broadcast for most of the films. Some of the filmmakers come to us and already have a digital aggregator on board that wants to work with their film, and so they've already made that deal. But more and more, we're handling that from the get-go.
Hi, I'm Linda Linda Olszewski, and I've just started a company called Movies That Matter, and I'm a festival and distribution strategist. The idea behind it was I've been working in the short film world for years. I'm sure you guys might know about the Oscar shorts that are out in theaters every year, or on iTunes and all the different platforms. We also have a shorts TV channel on DirecTV and AT&T Uverse. Well, one of the things that I've noticed being at festivals and meeting filmmakers all these years is that I would find that filmmakers, there would be some frustration. There would be frustration about either one, they felt like their film wasn't getting a lot of love from getting into festivals. Maybe they were spending a ton of money on Without a Box for submission fees and not getting into the festivals that they were hoping for, or just not understanding how to navigate this whole world. So I've been helping filmmakers with their cut to get their good film to great. Like, for instance, if you're interested in perhaps getting into some A-list festivals or pursuing things like an Academy Award, that's something where I can at least strategize with you and advise you in terms of your cut. In addition to that, I've been finding that moving from festivals to distribution is another thing that filmmakers seem to be. It's an ever-changing world. I'm sure these guys on the panel with me can note that the distribution world has been changing between theatrical and VOD and EST. So it's about strategizing to figure out what's the best thing for your film, and it's a very small boutique company. I also am consulting for Shorts HD or Shorts International, and the platforms that we're working with are iTunes and Amazon and Google Play, YouTube, EST, and Verizon.
My name's Cary Jones. I'm Vice President of National Sales for IFC Films and Sundance Selects. I've been with the company for about 9 years, but I've been in distribution for about 30. And as it's been said, there's been a huge amount of changes in the way films are released now. IFC's business model, for the most part, is really sort of been on the leading edge of exploring new technology for the release of feature-length films. So now, starting a few years ago, we have a business model where we will release films theatrically and video on demand day and date, or simultaneously. There are a few occasions when we'll release a film 30 days prior to the theatrical on video on demand. And a few other companies do that as well. But by and large, the majority of our films are released on the day and date model. Although every year we'll have a handful of films which will go out in the so-called traditional release, which is theatrical with a 90 to 120 day window before it hits video on demand or home video. But those are the rarities these days, because the cost of releasing films theatrically, as many of you probably know, and with those of you I spoke with earlier today, know that the cost has gone up quite a bit. But also there's been changes in the way people consume entertainment, and especially with the onset of online streaming and the variety of options available to them, on television. But we've had a pretty good level of success with this, and just because the films are on demand, we've sometimes found that helps, or at least enhances, the profile of the film for its theatrical exposure as well. So some of our films that we've done that way, have reached their audience. There's about, as I understand, some like 50 million homes that are available, but we don't even scratch that surface. The on-demand model allows us to reach a lot of markets that don't have a so-called art house in their city. So we can actually take a film out and reach people that might not have access to the film theatrically. So it's been a benefit to filmmakers as well as those that have been investing in independent cinema. The other interesting thing about it is that the demand for entertainment or for this kind of product has actually increased significantly. So IFC, between the three so-called labels within IFC Entertainment, which incorporate IFC Films, Sundance Selects, and IFC Midnight, we've actually acquired anywhere from 60 to 90 films a year and released that many. Some of them will get just a token release, just a few markets. Some will just go straight to on demand. And then others will see an extensive theatrical release. It can be from 20 markets on up to over 100 markets. Right now, one of our films that's currently out there, both on demand and in theaters, is the documentary Finding Vivian Maier, about the photographer who was posthumously discovered a few years ago. And we've probably penetrated over 120 individual markets throughout the United States. The variety of film that we've taken on at IFC has been as I said, I've been with them for 9 years, and there are films that we've taken on, and I've said there's just no way that anyone's going to go see this film, and I've been so happily surprised and proved wrong. But we've taken films that have been two-part films, like Che, Soderbergh's Che, which was a real challenge, releasing a two-part film theatrically. A lot of debate on how do you release a two-part film. And then we've had a 3-hour NC-17 rated French film, Blue is the Warmest Color, that was going to be a real challenge, trying to hit mainstream audiences with that, and that worked theatrically. And then we had 3D films, 3D art films, and playing 3D art films at a time when most art houses didn't have 3D capability. We thought, well, is the art house audience going to go to these big commercial 24 plexes and go see a film in 3D about, Herzog's exploration of a cave in France. So, that film actually did really, really well, and it surprised us. So we really, as IFC has sort of evolved, we've taken on more and more challenging projects, and it's been really rewarding. So I think as a independent distribution company, we've been very open-minded about working with both established filmmakers and new filmmakers on a plethora of themes and a myriad of distribution strategies. So. Sure. So, did everyone hear Chris's question? I think the question was basically what's been the biggest change over the last decade, and what do I see, or what is the landscape going to look like 10 years from now? Well, obviously the biggest change has been technology. So, just off the top of my head, one of the biggest changes has been the access of digital technology for an audience to see a film outside of the theatrical venue. And as I alluded to just a few minutes ago, the on-demand option, but streaming through Netflix has been a big option. And, just a few years ago, Netflix was really struggling with their, delivery of DVDs through the mail, and then once they started streaming, their whole business seemed to turn around. We make our films available not just on demand, but often on iTunes, Netflix, Xbox, a variety of digital platforms as well. That has taken off in some ways, but not as much as on demand. But Netflix is a window that we will license our films for, their Showtime, Netflix, other things after the theatrical. In terms of theaters, one of the things that we're seeing now, a big change, is that the theaters are finding that in order to attract audiences out of their home, because just aside from the demand, on demand or watching things on TV, people are spending more time doing things other than watching movies. They're spending more time on social media, online, and pursuing other things besides just going to films. So while ticket prices go up, and grosses, worldwide box office is going up, or at least domestically, I should say, is doing well. A lot of that is attributable to increased ticket prices. And in order to justify the increased ticket prices, theaters are now having to offer more and more amenities. So what we're seeing are more theaters being converted to dine-in theaters, luxury theaters where the seating has changed and made more plush or bigger seats. And one of the other things is we're seeing theaters being converted into big auditoriums converted into small auditoriums. So while you'll still have the big auditoriums for the IMAX and big presentation, studio films, we're also seeing theaters like the Violet Crown Cinema in Austin, Texas, and there's a conversion in San Francisco, Landmark Theaters in Embarcadero, where now the theater sizes are actually smaller to increase seating efficiency. So as was mentioned earlier, a lot of times Monday through Thursdays, the seat occupancy in theaters is pretty nominal. So in order to increase the efficiency of the theaters, some theater owners are making their auditoriums smaller, 40, 50 seats. And they can, if it's a big film, then they can program that theater on multiple screens. If you have showtimes that start every hour instead of every 2 hours, sometimes you can actually increase the box office gross that way than rather having one show on 250 seats. If you can have two shows, one on 40 and one on 50, and sell that out, you can actually make it more convenient to the theater goer and or film goer and make that more efficient. So 3D is not the panacea that a lot of theaters thought it would be, although it's still there. Not everyone wants to pay an upcharge of $2 to $3 or whatever it is to see a film in 3D, and they don't always like wearing the glasses. So that has been, not the big panacea. But one thing that I think more than anything else on the theatrical exhibition side, more than anything else, the biggest revolution that has happened is digital presentation. Fewer theaters, very few now, actually show film on 35 millimeter prints. So for filmmakers, you don't really have to worry so much about shooting in 35 and then converting to digital or making a 35 millimeter output. But it makes distribution and exhibition a lot more efficient through digital cinema DCIP. So.
Well, a couple of things. One is I definitely agree about the 35 mil is going away. For the Oscar-nominated short films, we can't even, I mean, that release would never be in existence or have grown to what it is now. It's at 2.5 million, the gross box office. It's been doing very well on video on demand and iTunes globally, as well as other EST platforms, solely because of digital. If it were a 35 mil print release, it would never have happened, and it surely would never have grown to the place that it is. But one of the things I found really interesting is as I've been shopping that release around internationally, and I've talked to theatrical owners globally, there are a lot of countries that are actually doing theatrical satellite. They can't even work with DCPs, so we're really far behind in terms of that. So I think, like when you were talking about where it is going to be in 10 years, this is really going to be some crazy thinking that you're going to hear from me, but this is what I think it's going to be. I think globally, I think theatrically, it will all be satellite or something similar. I also think it's going to be streamlined into probably two or three companies total, and it's going to be some sort of situation where literally, like you go on to internet and you're just going to say, maybe it'll be some platform called I Want It Now. And it's going to, and actually for the first time ever, I mean, if it really works, I think that, and this is actually going to be great for filmmakers and great for audiences, because one of the things I find that's quite frustrating is that when you're looking for a film, like for instance, maybe I've seen a film at a festival, or, well, here's a perfect example. I was on a flight to Canada, and on an Air Canada flight, and there was this film that I'd seen, and I knew it had played at the Landmark Theaters, and I wanted to buy the DVD. Well, I couldn't find the DVD. I went on to check on Google. It wasn't available in the US. It wasn't available for me to find on Netflix. It wasn't available on VOD. It was, it was just, and because of the limitations of distribution, it just wasn't available. And I ended up getting it through a distributor that I happened to have met on a panel who happened to have a copy. That's how I got the film. However, I think that in 5 or 10 years, I think that all these hiccups that we've been working with in terms of electronic sell-through, pay-per-view, all of that will probably be working, so that way actually a film that you see in Cannes, it actually can be available to a global audience. It'll be made available to a global audience. I mean, there won't be the limitations that there are now, where it's all compartmentalized within a country and it's just not available. I think it's just going to end up being made available, and I think that's going to translate into revenue for not only the filmmakers but also the companies. It's just going to be much more refined and effective and efficient.
I guess in terms of where it's been and where it's going, I mean, from me as being a very small company, just the physical media that I no longer have in my office is really remarkable. I mean, it's a desk and a computer, where before it was 35 millimeter cans, trailers. I mean, the first few films I distributed, there would be Digibeta, Beta SP, DVCam, DVD. There was like 5 different formats for all the different indie theaters that I was booking to. And now it's DCP and Blu-ray for all of them. I mean, even films that I distributed digitally a few years ago, we were still actually making 35 millimeter trailers for some of them, because the theaters weren't yet showing that. So that the streamlining of how we're delivering it is certainly making life easier all around. But I think in terms of for the future for smaller independent films that maybe don't get a bigger distributor that's doing a larger release, I think that there are certainly a lot of options that continue to come out there where filmmakers can sell their films directly. I mean, I think the thing that the struggle that continues, and this is also I feel from a perspective as a festival programmer, is that as the digital age makes it easier for people to make and produce films quicker and cheaper, the volume of films that you're competing against on a yearly basis just grows exponentially. So, the thing that that I try and advise filmmakers is really, while pursuing, distribution deals with, established companies that can do good business, that you should also be really trying to, create your own fan base for your film and look at what what are the options, because I mean, the problem is that films get old very fast now, and that if you sometimes can spend 6 months to 18 months on the festival circuit, going around the world and showing your film and then coming back with very little in the way of deals for your film. So, I try and advise filmmakers to, look at their options of ways that they can directly connect with their audience and figure out what are the elements, in their film that they can find groups that can get, support the film and help to promote the film and be able to, connect directly with them. I think that's, more and more that's only going to continue to happen. So I think that there's, many different options for every film in terms of what the potential for the distribution is. But I think, a self-distribution model is something that, the lion's share of independent filmmakers are going to end up doing for their work. And everyone, some that I work with are tremendous when it comes to marketing and promotion of their own work, and others really don't necessarily have that skill set, or maybe they really want to move on to their next project. So that's, something that really, filmmakers have to sort of consider in terms of how much more time. When I start to work with somebody, I'm always like, well, how much time and energy do you have for putting this film out in the world? Or, it's a real, it's another job, just like probably many of you have done Kickstarter campaigns or Indiegogo campaigns for projects. It's not, those things don't succeed because you just put them up on the internet and walk away and money comes in. The films that I've been associated that have done those, have a team of people that are getting behind that. But those campaigns are also audience building campaigns. I mean, those people who actually put money into your campaign really care about your film or care about you personally and want to help spread that word. And that's, that's an actual really direct way of connecting with the audience. So I think that, technologically that's only becoming easier and easier, but how you stand out from the pack and how creative you are with how you kind of promote and target who your audience is what sort of makes, part of what makes one film stand out over another.
Well, a big part of what all this technological change has meant, I mean, it's affected distribution in so many ways, and I think two very key ones, it's just monetizing a single picture is a completely different game than it was 10, 15 years ago when I started in the industry. And the loss of DVD revenue is a major, and home video in general, is a major, major loss. And it's not necessarily made up for through all these new technologies. And, the rise of reality TV and foreign broadcasters not paying as much for as many movies. All these factors mean it's really difficult to make money with independent film these days. I mean, if you have a modest budget of, say, $300,000 or something, to some people that might not sound modest at all, but it's really hard to make $300,000 back. I mean, it just is incredibly difficult. And we've also seen a graying independent film audience as it exists, at least in theaters. Going to the movie theater, the art house, to watch independent film is not a big part of the culture for 20-somethings and even 30-somethings. And so you see, I'm sure you guys see it when you come to the Noble here. I mean, it can often be a pretty old audience. And so to me, those are the big challenges going forward, is how do we replace that film-going culture? And as all these new tools evolve, I mean, the big thing that we as an industry is struggling with is how do we monetize them in a meaningful way? Because it's a completely, entirely different model. And I agree with what Jim's last point there was, growing your audience wherever you're going to end up with in distribution, whether you're doing it yourself, whether you're finding a traditional distributor like an IFC, then having that audience in place when your film is ready to enter the world is such a huge factor. I mean, to Jim's other point, when I first started in distribution in the mid '90s, I would get, and I tell this story all the time, I would get like 50 movies across my desk every month, and that was a lot, but it was manageable, and I was really diligent back then about watching every single one of them and writing every single filmmaker and telling them my thoughts. And when digital filmmaking came around, that number suddenly exploded, and it was like 500 movies that would come across my desk, and that's just untenable. And so it's this huge irony of the democratization of filmmaking, is that it's much easier to make a movie now and much less expensive, but there are so many of them, and the marketplace, you know, people's options for watching movies, it's so cluttered, and standing out within that is just so difficult, and it takes work. I mean, I think a big takeaway from this should be, you can't turn your movie over to a distributor anymore and walk away. You have to be ready to work to get it out in the world and to get people seeing it. Oh, I think the ratio is probably a little worse now, because back then, you know, when it cost $1 million, say whatever minimum to shoot on film, it took a different level of dedication. I mean, honestly, that's hard to raise. Skill a little bit, yeah, but yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's absolutely true. But I think the larger point is, you had to be committed to being a filmmaker back then, because you were going to waste a lot of somebody's money if it wasn't your own, you know. And today, it's possible to pretty much do it as a hobby. And in today's reality, as a result, most filmmakers need to view it not necessarily as a hobby. I mean, it should always be everyone's passion, but, you know, giving up a day job is an option for so few people, you know.
Well, I mean, you can measure it on a number of different levels. I mean, you know, there's the critical level, and if you get the endorsements and the support from the critical community, that's one level of success. As a filmmaker, if you get if your profile is raised by your release and it gets you your next gig or enables you to raise money for your next film, then that's one measure or criteria for judging your success on a personal level. As a distributor, you know, we're gonna make that judgment more or less by profit and loss, you know, from a financial point of view. So, and then even within that criteria, or excuse me, from that perspective, it's like, how big of a success is it? You know, did you make your money just from a few markets, or was it successful across the board? But then, you know, ultimately it comes down to what the bottom line profit and loss is. So depending on the distribution company, and, you know, not a lot of people, this is not the most transparent thing, but there are a lot of costs that, you know, some filmmakers that are going out for the first time aren't even aware of, you know, that a distributor has to incur. You know, it's not just the cost of buying print, which is becoming less important these days with the advent of, you know, social media. But, you know, to get an audience into your movie, you know, you still have to resort on mass media, and some of it is still expensive. The other thing is there are overhead costs. So, you know, if you have a distribution company with a lot of employees, you know, there's a lot of overhead that you got to cover. So the more films you have, the less it costs on a per film basis. But anyway, to answer your question, ultimately, I think from our point of view, it's going to be how the success of the film in terms of the prestige it may bring, as well as the financial, profit and loss.
But you guys should definitely all think about what success means for you, because that's crucial, and that also can start defining your distribution decisions, because they might not be the same as ours,
Right, it's a question of scale too, in terms of what the film is and what the reality of how many theaters a film can actually really get into, and then what you're looking for publicity. I mean, last year did a very tiny release for a film called Almost in Love that had Alex Karpovsky, who was on Girls, and Alan Cumming. And when I first encountered this film a few years earlier, I would tell people it's got Alan Cumming and then this guy Alex Karpovsky. But then since he was on Girls, he became a better. Anyway, we opened it at this tiny theater in Brooklyn called The Rerun, which actually the guy who ran the theater is now in jail. And a small theater in Los Angeles called the Downtown Independent. And, the filmmakers spent literally a few $1,000s, and I handled press in both markets, and they got, great reviews in the New York Times and LA Times, New York Magazine, fortunately, And then we made a digital deal, and it was available on in-demand and digital platforms, and made a decent amount of money there, nothing remarkable, but they were very happy because they made the film for next to nothing. They had some good people in it. They got it out into the world. When people can ask for it, they can go, this is where you can find it. And when they're approaching financiers for another film, they're like, well, look what this filmmaker was singled out for his expertise as a great director in the New York Times, the LA Times. That means a lot to some other people. So, so that is a success. It's not a success in that they're sitting around being, counting all the money they made back. They didn't make a huge amount back, but they didn't expend a lot. So, it's really a question of your own needs and your own desires and your what else you want to make next. So.
Our budgets are yours. Our budgets are yours.
So the question was, for those who couldn't hear in the back, I'm assuming some people couldn't hear in the back, was that with the different distribution models that we all represent up here, is there a sweet spot for profitability or budget and profitability? Okay, that was the question.
I don't see one. I've never really believed in the sweet spot of the production budget. Every year there's some company that's launching that's going to focus on movies in the $2 to $4 million range, or the 5 to 15, and it seems to change every year. And there are certain things that you can say about box office grosses and whatnot, and where that will get you in terms of a return. Meaning, is Netflix going to buy this, or is it even going to be available for in-theater, on-demand, or pure cable VOD? But on the production side, no, I've never seen one.
What about what? I mean, for me, no, I wouldn't say there's any sweet spot as much as, because I'm working in partnership with filmmakers and they're fronting the costs for the release. So I'm trying to, scale a release budget that is, within a reasonable range to be raised, that, as much of it as possible that can be recouped back from the theatrical is obviously great. And I've had films that have recouped more than what they laid out for the theatrical, and then, but whether then that ends up recouping them for the total cost of what they made for the film, it's film to film. So no, there isn't a sweet spot. I mean, for the size of the releases and the types of films that I've handled, they're very, very modest budgets. in the sort of $20,000 to $60,000 range, and usually in the sort of 30 to 40 range. But also the distribution changes a lot in the past few years. I mean, in one Note by Note that I mentioned, and Throw Down Your Heart, which I did in like 2007, 2009, those are times where I spent a year booking these films in theaters, and there wasn't this imminent digital release. And in one case, the broadcast was like a year and a half later. So I could, but that's also because I'm a small business, and I don't have there isn't a bigger staff, so I work in a different way. But those films had more time to just kind of inch their way around the country, and that we would just work market to market, and it's much harder all of a sudden, to be able to do that just in the past 4 years, because there's so many other films that you're competing against for screen space.
I don't think there is any such thing as a sweet spot that I know of. I mean, we look at every film on a film-by-film basis, what rights you have for that film, assuming you have all media, but, our company will look at what we feel the film is capable of doing, and that is a whole series of conversations. And then you got to look at what your costs are going to be and what the potential revenue streams, because you might be able to do much more on video on demand or on streaming than you would in theatrical, or maybe certain films lend themselves more to theatrical. But to answer your question, I can't imagine a particular or singular sweet spot for a general assessment.
What is the type of distribution that they're offering? Well, I guess the first thing is, in terms of shorts, is the big thing is it an exclusive or non-exclusive? Are they paying you a flat fee for like usage on it, like kind of like an SVOD subscription, because there's a lot of different models? Or, I'll give you an idea of how we work. So for Shorts International, who I've been working with since 2006, it's a 50-50 distribution split, and there are certain rights that are exclusive and certain rights that are non-exclusive. It depends on if we're going out to buyers that are requiring exclusivity. That's where we need exclusivity. If we don't need exclusivity for those platforms, we don't require the exclusivity. For a normal film, in terms of short film distribution, there's no advances being paid at this point, unless, of course, you're an Oscar nominee where there is the Oscar release already set into place. We know that we're going to be in theaters, on video on demand, iTunes, Shorts HD, and all the other EST platforms. The other types of questions you should ask is, are they going to be, are you keeping your copyright, or is, because you have to really read the fine print, are they requiring you to have E&O, or are they going to provide E&O? And for those of you who don't know, E&O is errors and omissions insurance. Is that enough answers for you, or? Okay.
Oh, yeah. So the question is, with DIY distribution out there and having some successes, how do traditional distributors have to adapt? And I think they already are. I mean, they always are. And, you know, this may sound really bad, but we're collectively probably going to do it better than you are, you know, by yourself. I mean, it's just because these are our careers. This is what we've done for decades. But using us, you know, to find your audience on whatever level it is, yeah, I mean, we have to make money as well. But I mean, I think a lot of the things that have kind of come out of DIY distribution, you know, filmmakers going on tour with the film, and I shouldn't even say those things have been around forever, but that are prominent in current DIY distribution, you know, those are things that we do more of, I think. Anything else you guys see on that?
Well, listen, you can go online and find all kinds of forums or websites with suggestions, recommendations, and ideas on how to perfect a DIY model based on somebody else's experience or people who've actually worked in distribution before. But there are a number of examples where filmmakers have gone directly to theaters themselves and have done really well. But you also have to remember that you're going to be the one that's going to have the burden of the costs to get your film screened, for the press to, you know, contact the press to do your feature stories. There, a lot of the costs that you have or that distributors have now become your own. The other thing is there are some exhibition companies, some theaters that are circuits, not necessarily independents, that only will deal with distributors. They won't want to deal necessarily directly with the filmmaker themselves. Sometimes they will, but in large measure, they're very busy dealing with the studios and a whole number of independent distribution companies. So for you to get a play date at a theater, you know, in the town that you want, you got to make sure that they're going to book their film, or they may say to you, yeah, I'll play your film, but only on a four-wall basis. And on a four-wall basis means you're essentially renting the theater. And if you're doing the rental fee, or if you're paying the rental fee, are you getting the best deal than you would if a distributor were handling the film? So there are certainly going to be advantages to have a distributor handle your film than if you were to do it yourself. Obviously, there are more costs that you have, and then they may be lower than if the distributor was doing it. The other thing is, do you know when you want to play your film in a particular part of the country, which is the best theater? The third thing is, unless you have a pretty well-established website, which you probably would, if a lot of theater owners and film buyers and exhibitors in general look online at how films perform. And if they see a film that you booked yourself in your own hometown, so you did really well, and they heard about the film, they're going to want to say, they may say, well, where can I get that film? Because they want to play it now. So I get calls frequently from other companies asking me, you know, do you know who's releasing this film? And I may not, because it may be a DIY release. So that's the other, maybe one sacrifice is having access to other towns that you may not even know that are interested in playing your film. So distributors, as was mentioned, you know, been doing this for a long time. They know which theaters to go into, what are the best deals for you, and also how to get into other or have access to other parts of the country that may not have occurred to you or, you know, the DIY filmmaker. But
Yeah,
certainly there are lots of ways to save money by doing it yourself, absolutely.
Right, and oh, I mean, both. Yeah, I do. And it's a tough it's a tough balance because the theaters the independent theaters, just to stay on that side, that you can get to, Brian up in the far reaches up there who programs this theater, I'm sure talks to lots of filmmakers, and the more that try and get in touch with him directly, the more prone he's going to be to probably limiting it to the people that have product, that know what his problems are, as well as what they want for the film. And that kind of applies across the board. I mean, when you enter the VOD spaces, iTunes, for instance, you can't, as a filmmaker, make a deal directly with iTunes currently. And maybe they'll open their doors wide at some point, but it'll require them either having some crazy algorithm or increasing their staff by 400 people. So, keep finding that balance. It's a really interesting question. I don't think there's a good answer, because how I would tend to say that DIY distribution, and it takes so much work and it takes so much dedication that I already see it every day, where filmmakers are coming to us, Gathr, and thinking that we're some magic bullet in the middle of this whole distribution enterprise. And it's like, no, you're going to have to really work to get this done. And a lot of them, frankly, just aren't willing to do it. Yeah. They're not willing to go through that process. And so I would tend to think that the DIY distribution would start to kind of settle out a little bit.
Yeah, and also I think the DIY is, do it with others is sort of a more realistic, that, to Cary's point is that, any of us that, do bookings and get films into theaters, we have relationships with all these people at these theaters. I've been calling Brian for years about films, and I can get a sense with the film, I think he's going to take this, or I don't know, or maybe I need to give him a little extra push about what else we're doing. And how we sort of sell individually, theater to theater, is something that's that we develop over time. That it's very hard for an individual filmmaker with a film to sort of be able to handicap those odds. I can look at something and think in New York, well, I think this is for IFC, or this is Film Forum, this is Cinema Village. Know who to go to. And most of the time I'm right, but sometimes it still takes 2 or 3 months to get them to say yes or no. And that's going to be much more frustrating for you to go through, because then you don't know, if you don't have the relationships with the people that do that, how much you can bug them before they go, you know what, you're driving me crazy, which, you run into. And so it's, I think that's...
I would imagine, and I'm very sympathetic to do it yourself distribution or self-distribution, because if I made a movie, and I've raised money and investors want to know what's happening with the movie, and I don't have a distributor, I would want to do everything I can to get that film shown and get it on screen. So I recognize the importance of that in the absence of having a distributor. There are things you can do, but you have to also realize you have to have some money for it. It's not going to just happen magically at no cost. I know of a filmmaker who made a film. She went to AMC Theaters, which is one of the biggest circuits in the United States, and they have a program where, if you come to them with a marketing plan and the money to do or execute the plan that you have, and that would include advertising, because they're not just going to give you the screens for free, then you can work with them. And they opened up in 6 screens in Los Angeles. It was a Latino-based film, and she did really well. And she had come to AMC with this whole program, a marketing program to support her release. And as a result, they gave her a run in Times Square in New York, which did well too. But there's costs involved in that, and you have to really have all your ducks in a row when you go and have these meetings with them. There are certainly a lot of cases, the Berlingers used to distribute their films themselves, and they did really well. But once they built on their reputation when they went with the second one.
They were also in a different era where you could come to a college town and they'd pay you $25,000, $50,000.
Yeah, it's just like when people took out Reefer Madness, 20, 30 years ago, whatever it was, they were doing it out of the back of their car, and they had a whole idea, but things have changed so dramatically, and they're continuing to evolve. But I certainly recognize the importance of being able to release a film on your own if you don't have the support of an established distributor. IFC Films is, in many respects, we're not that big of a distribution company. You know, we have a small staff, and we're competing against bigger companies, and there are so many little nuances that go on in the conversation about which auditorium a film is going to open in, on which theater, so in any given market, or can you take more than one theater? You have to go over the strategies. Are you better off opening your film exclusively in this market, or if you're going to take another theater, is that going to change the nature of the deal? And then after you open your film and it performs to a certain level, and like I said, I have these battles every Monday. Is your film going to hold a second week? Or are you done after a week? And a lot of it depends on your gross or what kind of leverage you have. Where does your film stand ranking-wise in a theater that's playing 20 films? Well, if your film is open and you're at number 18 on 20 screens, you pretty much can consider it done after a week. The real battles come, if you're in the middle, and then the theater is saying, well, I've got 4 films to open. I'm going to do more with my 8th screen of Transformers than I will do with 1 screen of your film. So you have these fights as well. And this is where having a distributor who sort of knows what the exhibitor's dealing with, what the arguments are that you have week in and week out, can really be to the benefit of the filmmaker. But if you're doing it yourself and, you may not have that kind of leverage. I'm not saying that IFC will always have that leverage, but whether it's Fox Searchlight or Sony Classics or Warner Brothers, those battles happen week in and week out. And so that's one of the differences you're going to have if you have someone fighting those battles for you, or as was said just a few minutes ago, which theater, are you going to profit from the most? And then also, one thing that you need to understand is how the media works. Do you open your film in New York first, or New York and LA? Or do you open in your hometown where you can probably pop a really big number that opening weekend and get the attention? So there's a number of different strategies, and there are consultants out there, some here at this table, but there are a number of them out there who can help plan what is not just a rational release for your film, but one that may guarantee you the best shot of a return. So that's the other thing to take into account when you're trying to do it on your own.
Well, I'm going to have to interrupt real quickly. We're completely out of time. You'll have one more comment, but we've got to empty the theater because we have another show at 2. So legally we have to get out of the theater. But so we have one more comment here. Go ahead.
I just wanted to conclude that one of the reasons that for do-it-yourself distribution, one of the battles you may have is that there's a lot of deliverables that are required, and when you're coming out the gate as a first-time filmmaker or second-time filmmaker in the independent distribution world, the different buyers are interested in working specifically with distribution companies because they already have that down packed. They don't have to worry about the films passing QC or having to chase some of the deliverables that are required that are just standard in our industry. It's just something that we just know. And this is especially prevalent right now with all the digital platforms such as iTunes and Amazon. They're very, very, very specific about what they will allow onto their stores. And specifically is even to the point of a poster not having laurels on it, just having a title and the faces. They're very specific. They give you very specific criteria, and with your master delivery, everything. And it's just something that I'm just bringing up because that, as well as distributors will have E&O insurance. And so as a result, it's generally like one contract, one package of deliverables. It's so easy, and it just streamlines the distribution process. So that's where a distributor might be worth the money that they're paying. You're paying them.
Let's have a round of applause for all our distributors, please.